The interview began with the usual questions from the new host, but no one could expect what this host would do, and after his same type of questions, Trump's followed. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you are watching from in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the latest stories. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our show, Eric proclaimed, and the audience erupted in applause. Tonight, we have two titans of Hollywood whose roles have become part of our culture. Please welcome Samuel L. Jackson and Bruce Willis. The audience exploded with cheers as Samuel L. Jackson strode onto the stage. His walk was confident, almost theatrical. Following him was Bruce Willis, with his signature sarcastic smirk, dressed in a simple yet elegant navy blue suit. Samuel, Bruce, thank you for coming, Eric began, his tone friendly but tinged with a hint of formality. You both became legends after Pulp Fiction, Die Hard, Unbreakable. What was it like working with each other? The room fell silent, awaiting their response. Jackson leaned back in his chair, removed his glasses, and glanced at Willis with a barely noticeable smile. Well, let's just say sometimes it felt like I was acting with a ghost, he said, his voice low but piercing. Bruce wasn't always there emotionally, but he played beautifully. His words hung in the air like a spark ready to ignite. The audience let out a nervous laugh, sensing the tension. Willis raised an eyebrow, his smile turning colder, but he responded with his trademark sarcasm. Maybe I wasn't theatrical, but I always showed up to set without the pomp. Not everyone can pull that off. The audience laughed again, but the laughter was tense, as if everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. The camera operators exchanged quick glances, and in the control room, someone whispered, "Oh, this is going to get interesting." Eric, sensing the conversation teetering on the edge, quickly moved to the next question, trying to keep the tone light. "Have you ever been jealous of each other?" he asked, his voice cautious but his eyes glinting with curiosity. Jackson leaned forward, his gaze sharpening. "Me? I built everything with my own hands," he said, his voice brimming with pride. "Nobody pushed me to stardom, and I never got mad when Bruce got bigger billing on the posters. That's not my ego. That's Hollywood." Willis remained still, but his eyes narrowed. He responded quietly with a biting edge. "But you're still bringing it up? Sounds like it stings." Silence fell. The audience froze, feeling the air in the studio grow thick. Jackson slowly turned his head toward Willis, his face turning serious, almost menacing. "It's not that stings," he snapped, his voice deeper, almost threatening. "What stings is that some of us became symbols, while others just stopped being somebody when the blockbusters dried up." The words hit like thunder. The audience gasped, some even covering their mouths. Willis clenched his jaw, his fingers lightly gripping the armrest of his chair. The camera operators zoomed in, the control room team panicking, whispering, "This is getting out of hand." Eric Thompson, sensing he was losing control, nervously adjusted his tie, his smile looking forced. The tension in the studio reached its peak. Samuel L. Jackson's words, sharp as a blade, still hung in the air. "What stings is that some of us became symbols, while others just stopped being somebody when the blockbusters dried up." The audience froze, sensing the moment teetering on the edge of an explosion. Bruce Willis sat motionless, his sarcastic smirk gone, replaced by a cold, piercing stare. His fingers gripped the armrest of his chair so tightly that his knuckles whitened. Eric Thompson, the host, felt sweat beading on his temples. He knew his next question could either diffuse the situation or pour fuel on the fire. In the control room, panic was mounting. Camera operators frantically switched between close-ups of Jackson and Willis, while the producer whispered into Eric's earpiece, "Eric, steer the conversation now." But Thompson, feeling the weight of the moment and the pressure of ratings, decided to take a risk. All right, he said, trying to regain a light tone, but his voice trembled. "Let's imagine something special. If this were your last film together, would you do it?" The question lingered in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. The audience held its breath awaiting a reaction. Jackson leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing, his lips curling into a faint smile that promised nothing good. "If the script's good?" "Yeah," he replied, his voice low and measured, but each word dripping with challenge. But only if we don't have to pretend we're buddies. The audience gasped. A few people in the front rows exchanged shocked glances. Willis slowly turned his head toward Jackson. His face impassive, but a spark flickered in his eyes. He smiled thinly, almost dangerously. Honestly, he said, his voice calm but laced with steel. Respect is better than fake friendship. Imin. Those words were the detonator. The audience erupted into whispers. Someone even exclaimed, "Wow!" Eric Thompson, sensing he was losing control, tried to intervene. "Hold on, guys. Let's clarify," he began. But Jackson cut him off. "Clarify." Jackson's voice thundered like a storm, and he rose from his chair, his charisma filling the studio. "You want to clarify why we're here? We're not just action stars you can shove into a box labeled good old 90s. I'm a symbol because I fought for every role, every word I speak on screen. I don't let Hollywood or anyone else define who I am." The audience exploded into applause, but the claps were tinged with tension. People weren't sure whether to cheer for Jackson or wait for Willis' response. Bruce rose slowly, his movements calm but radiating an undeniable strength. He looked at Jackson, then at the audience, and his voice, though quiet, cut through the air like a knife. "And I, Sam, never chase symbols," he said, his sarcasm laced with bitterness. "I did my job, risked everything on set while you were still learning to deliver your monologues. You think I stopped being somebody? Maybe I just don't shout about my greatness on every corner." The room fell silent. The tension became unbearable, as if the air in the studio had thickened and grown heavy. Camera operators frantically captured every gesture. Jackson clenching his fists, Willis slightly tilting his head as if bracing for a blow. Eric Thompson, now openly flustered, tried to intervene again. "Guys, let's get back to the topic of veterans," he started, but his words drowned in the audience's murmur. Jackson turned to Willis, his eyes blazing. "You think I'm shouting about greatness? I'm shouting about respect? About not being written off because we're past 60? About not being reduced to stereotypes of action heroes?" Willis stepped closer, his voice sharpening. "And you think I don't get that? I fought for every role when people said I was just another bald hero. But I don't complain. Sam, I do my work and don't blame others for my setbacks." The audience erupted. Some clapped, others shouted words of support, but confusion reigned in the room. People didn't know whose side to take. Eric, now in full panic, raised his hands, trying to calm the crowd. But Jackson and Willis seemed to have forgotten him. They stood face to face, two titans whose careers defined an era, but whose words now laid bare old wounds. "You know what?" Bruce Jackson said, his voice quieter but even more piercing. "We both deserve respect, but you can't deny that sometimes you just go with the flow instead of fighting." Willis smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "And you, Sam, sometimes fight so hard you forget what you're fighting for. Maybe it's time we both grew up." Those words were the final straw. Jackson turned sharply to Eric. "I'm done," he snapped, and without waiting for a response, stormed off the stage. Willis, casting a brief glance at the audience, followed him. The room descended into chaos. Some clapped, others shouted their names, while some sat in stunned silence. Eric Thompson stood alone on the stage, his face pale, his microphone trembling in his hand. "We will be back after the break," he stammered, but his words were lost in the uproar. As the spotlights dimmed and the cameras shut off, social media exploded. Hashtags Team Jackson and Team Willis flooded X, and clips from the interview spread like wildfire. Fans split into camps. Some admired Jackson's passion, others respected. Willis restraint. X posts buzzed. Sam tore up the stage. He spoke the truth about Hollywood versus Bruce's class. He didn't stoop to shouting. But most agreed on one thing. Their clash exposed the truth about ageism and stereotypes in the industry. Eric Thompson's show scored record views, but his reputation took a hit. Critics accused him of failing to keep the situation under control. Meanwhile, Jackson and Willis, despite the conflict, gained a new wave of popularity. Fans called for a joint film, with posts like "Give us Unbreakable 2," racking up thousands of likes. Backstage in a quiet corridor far from the cameras, Jackson and Willis stood by a coffee machine. The tension was gone, replaced by a light weariness and faint smiles. "Well, old man," Jackson said, sipping his coffee, "we sure scared the hell out of them, didn't we?" Willis chuckled, his eyes glinting with familiar sarcasm. "You've always been a showman, but damn Sam, you nearly overdid it with that ghost line." Jackson laughed, his booming laugh echoing in the empty corridor. "And you with your grow-up, that was harsh, brother." They stood in silence for a moment, looking at each other. Then Willis extended his hand, and Jackson gripped it firmly. "Respect," Willis said. "Respect," Jackson replied. And they walked off laughing, knowing their conflict had become a legend that would buzz online for years to come.